I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. If you are passionate about the craft of professional wrestling, and you're never done learning all about it, then you have landed in the exact right place, my friend. Go ahead, join the Till We Make It tribe, subscribe right now. In today's video, I want to talk about the work of a heel in a pro wrestling match, specifically by dispelling some of the myths about cheap heat. And in order to do this, we're going to have to talk about one of the foundational concepts of heel work in pro wrestling. But just as a starting point, let's pick the most obvious place of them all to begin this conversation. What exactly is cheap heat? To eliminate any confusion at the very top of this, let me just clarify. We are not talking about Act 2 of 3-act wrestling match structure. Act 2 is sometimes referred to as the heat or steam or sometimes the rising tension. And although we might touch on Act 2 of a wrestling match at the end of today's video, that's not what I mean when I reference cheap heat. When I'm talking about cheap heat, what I mean by that is getting a knee-jerk reaction from an audience instead of a reaction which is earned. And to help crystallize this in your mind, I'll give you a few examples. They sound like this.
Shut up over there. You, show me respect. You're ugly and fat, and you're stupid and lazy. You know what? Every single person in name of town here is a loser, just like every member of local sports team name here is.
Cheap heat is a shortcut to getting a knee-jerk reaction out of an audience. Most places that you travel, people will not like being called fat or lazy or ugly or being told that they are a loser. Crowds will not respond positively to being bossed around, like being told, stand up and salute me during my entrance, or be quiet when I'm talking on the microphone. These are just reflex-like reactions you can count on in virtually any market. Most places that you go, the audience isn't going to respond well if you call them all a bunch of losers. But that reaction is not due to your really compelling character work or your brilliantly structured wrestling match. It's cheap. And I do think getting a reaction solely because you've insulted the audience is a shortcut. That's cheap heat to me. And before we dive any further into this topic, would you leave a like-a-palooza on today's video? It really does help the channel to grow. Thanks for doing that. The central point of today's video is this. It's a mistake to think that cheap heat actually gets a heel over. Getting a negative reaction out of an audience that lasts all of 2 seconds is not going to get a heel character over. Choosing the lowest hanging fruit by making obvious insults to an audience is the kind of heat that simply evaporates 2 seconds later. And because we may never return to the topic of cheap heat in another video, I want to address this right now. I do think there's one other key thing that has to be added to the list of what constitutes cheap heat. It's stereotypes. The 3 previous eras of professional wrestling, the carnival era of wrestling, the territory era of wrestling, and the cable TV era of wrestling were especially guilty of this. Stereotypes were rampant in the 3 previous eras of professional wrestling. In American pro wrestling, stereotypes were everywhere, and it was based simply on whoever we had last been fighting. Were we fighting the Germans or the Japanese? Were we fighting the Soviets or the Iraqis? Those stereotypes would abound. And I really think that playing upon the broadest possible stereotypes in order to get yourself a heel reaction from the audience, that's also cheap heat. Incidentally, if there's something further you think needs to be on my list of cheap heat tactics that I've not mentioned so far, go ahead and drop it for me down below in the comments right now. None of these cheap heat tactics will actually yield substantive results because of two inarguable facts of professional wrestling. And number one is this: pro wrestling fans have heard it all before. Basic insults, the low-hanging fruit of cheap heat, bossing the crowd around, indulging in stereotypes of the evil foreigner character. These things are played out, they're kind of tasteless, they are cliche. And I think indulging in cliches only means you've got nothing new to add to the conversation. If the only heel reaction you can get out of a crowd is by employing cheap heat tactics for yourself, I think you have officially run out of ideas. And that second fact is this: the actual purpose of a heel in professional wrestling is to get their babyface over. Full stop. Notice I did not say the purpose of a heel is to get a negative reaction from the audience. Notice I did not say the purpose of a heel is to get the crowd to hate them. Those are results. That's not a purpose. The sole purpose of a heel in a pro wrestling match is to get their babyface over. The heel shows up in service to the babyface. That's their purpose, and that is different from a result. Now, the result of showing up in service to your babyface could be a negative reaction from the audience. The result of that could be that the crowd hates them, but that's not the purpose. A purpose is not a result, and that is a key distinction that serious working pros cannot afford to ignore. The plain truth about cheap heat is, can we lower the lights for this segment? No? Great. Cheap heat will never get you over because it does not directly connect to the purpose of being a heel, which is to get your babyface over. Real heat earns you a reaction by mastering the technique of withholding what the audience wants and needs in the right measures at the right time. And that is a difficult skill to master. But it's the exact thing that turbocharges the end of Act 2 and all of Act 3 of a pro wrestling match. It's going to add rocket fuel to your hope spots, to your hot tags, and to your comebacks. It is as fundamental as understanding that it isn't how likable a babyface is that powers the climax of a wrestling match, but rather how sympathetically they sell. Want to go deeper into character dynamics and audience reactions? Then grab my book, Toolbox: Building Better Pro Wrestling. It's available over on Amazon.com. No matter where you are on Earth, there's an audio version over on Audible.com as well. You can take your education, your participation until we make it to the next level by joining us over on Patreon. A link's popping up on screen right now. It's also down below for you in the descriptus. And if delving into pro wrestling psychology is brand new to you, the playlist appearing on screen is must-see viewing. Click on it right now.